Imagine two people of the exact same age, same city, same salary of $80,000 a year, same savings, $70,000 in the bank. One buys a house. The other continues to rent. 20 years pass. One has a fully paid off house worth over $500,000. The other has an investment portfolio so large it surprises everyone around them, including themselves. The problem with typical videos on this topic: proponents of buying show the final home value years later and use it as ultimate proof they are right. Proponents of renting talk about freedom and flexibility, remaining silent about the long-term price of that flexibility. None of those calculations look at the full picture. This video calculates everything. What we'll cover today: mortgage interest that eats up your payments in the early years, closing costs you only find out about at the notary's desk, property taxes that grow right alongside your home's value, a realistic, not promotional budget for home maintenance. What happens if a renter actually invests the difference in costs? A quick reminder: this channel breaks down financial decisions using real numbers, not just pretty thumbnail graphics, but math that holds up in a spreadsheet. Age: 32. Savings: $70,000 in annual income. $80,000. Home value: $350,000. The buyer puts down all their $70,000, exactly 20% of the home's value, avoiding private mortgage insurance, PMI. They take out a 30-year loan at 7% interest. The monthly principal and interest payment comes out to $1,863. Full monthly housing cost breakdown: mortgage payment, principal plus interest, $1,863 property, tax, $350 homeowners insurance, $1 to $15 maintenance reserve, standard 1% of home value annually, $290 total monthly cost, $2,753. The renter continues renting a similar place for $2,000 a month. They invest their $70,000 into a broad market index fund, and the difference, $653 every single month, also goes straight into investments. At the moment of signing the papers, the buyer doesn't step forward. They fall significantly behind. Closing costs, loan origination fees, title insurance, legal fees, prepaid taxes, and escrow reserves typically range from 2% to 5% of the home's purchase price. The real starting entry cost is $82,000 to $88,000, not just $70,000. Breakdown of the payment: in month 1, interest to the bank, $1,633, 87%. Principal repayment, $230, 13%. Main takeaway: the phrase renting is throwing money away stays afloat because it sounds convincing. But in the first year, the buyer spends $2,723 a month on payments that build absolutely zero equity. The renter spends $2,000 on rent. The renter is actually throwing away less. Timeline reaches year 3. Lock icon on the buyer's house. Accessible any business day icon on the renter's portfolio. All right, 3 years in. Let's see where everyone stands. The buyer has paid roughly $95,500 in total housing costs over 3 years. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Of all that money, only about $8,300 actually went toward paying down the loan. The remaining loan balance still sits at approximately $217,700. Now, the good news for the buyer: the home has appreciated. At a realistic 3 to 4% annual growth rate, that $350,000 house is now worth somewhere between $383,000 and $396,000. That puts their equity, the part they actually own, at roughly $111 to $124. The renter, meanwhile, has paid about $72,000 in rent over the same 3 years. Their investment portfolio, now sitting at approximately $120,000, and every dollar of it is accessible any business day. No agent, no paperwork, no waiting. So on paper, the renter is slightly ahead in liquid capital. The buyer has more total capital on paper, but it's locked inside the walls of a house. You can't sell 10% of your kitchen to pay a bill. And if they did sell today, 5 to 6% in agent commissions comes straight off the top. One more thing that rarely makes it into these comparisons. In those 3 years, the buyer already dealt with a water heater replacement, $300. Then a wall crack that needed patching, $400, plus a full weekend of their time. Both came out of the maintenance reserve. And here's the thing, those expenses aren't done. They will come back in different forms on a different timeline for as long as they own that house. 1. Future selling costs. When the buyer decides to sell, they'll pay agent commissions, usually 5-6%. On a $500,000 home, that's $25,000 and $30,000 straight off the table. Combined with closing costs, the round-trip loss often hits 8 to 10% of the home's value. 2. Property taxes rise with value. If the $350K house becomes a $500K house in 15 years, taxes rise proportionally. The renter doesn't bear this risk directly, the landlord does. 3. The real maintenance budget. Cheap years mean sealant and light bulbs for a couple of $100. Real years mean a $9,000 roof, a $7,500 HVAC system, or a $4,000 foundation repair. On a long timeline, these aren't exceptions. They are the norm. 4. Opportunity cost. The $70,000 down payment leaves the investment market at closing. At a 10% average annual market return, that sum would have grown to roughly $470,000 in 20 years. That isn't lost money. It's the alternative outcome traded for home equity. Coming up, checkpoints at 10 and 20 years. Subscribe so you don't miss our next breakdown, where these two strategies merge into one. 10 years in. This is where things start to get interesting. The buyer's home is now worth somewhere between $483,000 and $500,000. Their remaining loan balance sits at approximately $246, which means their equity has grown to roughly $237 to $254,000. That's real, meaningful wealth being built. But let's talk about what that decade actually cost them. Maintenance alone ran between $30,000 and $40,000 over 10 years. That's not negligence. That's just what owning a home looks like in the real world. Roofs age, HVAC systems fail, things break on their own schedule, not yours. The renter's investment portfolio is now sitting at approximately $281,000, fully liquid, no commissions, no waiting. On paper, they are still slightly ahead in accessible capital. But here's where the story starts to shift. The renter is now paying $2,690 a month in rent. Remember, the buyer's mortgage payment is still $1,863. It has not moved. It will not move for another 20 years. That number is locked in, the same as it was on day one. The renter's housing cost, on the other hand, has no ceiling. It goes wherever the market takes it, and over the next 10 years, it will keep climbing. So, yes, the renter is still slightly ahead today, but the gap is closing, and the direction of that gap tells you everything about what's coming next. 20 years. Let that sink in for a second. 2 decades of mortgage payments, market swings, maintenance bills, and monthly investment contributions. Let's see where both of them actually ended up. The buyer's home is now worth between $670,000 and $700,000. Their remaining loan balance is down to approximately $188,000, meaning their equity has grown to somewhere between $482,000 and $512,000. That's nearly $500,000 built inside an asset they've been living in this entire time. The renter's investment portfolio sits at $550,000 to $580,000. Liquid, diversified, accessible the next morning if they need it. So on paper, the renter is still slightly ahead. And that's a legitimate result. But here's what the raw numbers don't immediately show you. The renter is now writing a check for $3,600 every single month just to keep a roof over their head. And that number has nowhere to go but up. The buyer, still paying $1,163, the exact same payment they made on day one 20 years ago, not a dollar more, and in 10 more years, that payment disappears completely. Year 30, the buyer, Mortgage is gone. Home fully paid off. Value sitting at $850,000 to $950,000. Monthly housing costs have dropped to just $900 to $1,100. Taxes and insurance. That's it. No more payments. No more bank. Done. Year 30. The renter. Still renting. Monthly rent is now $4,700 to $5,000. No cap on it, no finish line, no version of this story where that number stops growing. Illustration of someone spending money on shopping, vacations, instead of investing. The rent and invest strategy only works under one condition. The difference in costs is actually invested every single month, even during months when the market tanks. 30%, and everything inside you says to wait it out in cash. Most people don't do this. Free money turns into a bigger apartment or a nicer vacation. A mortgage payment, unlike an intention to invest, acts as automatic forced discipline. And that is a massive value that no spreadsheet can fully capture. List of warning cards. The break-even point typically hits around year 5-7 of ownership. Selling a home 3 years after buying often means taking a loss compared to renting. Concentration risk. All your capital is tied to one house on one street in one neighborhood. Remember housing markets that stagnated or dropped for years. Low liquidity. You can't sell 5% of your house to cover a sudden medical bill. Accessing home equity always costs time and money. 2 columns. Buying wins, renting wins. Buying wins if you plan to live in one place for at least 10 years. The price to rent ratio, home price divided by annual rent, is below 20. Rent for a comparable home is already close to what a mortgage payment would be. The local real estate market shows steady growth above the national average. Renting wins if you might move in the next 3-5 years. The price to rent ratio is above 25. Your career requires mobility, and that flexibility creates real financial upside. You possess the strict discipline to invest the difference every month, regardless of market conditions. What if you didn't have to choose just one? Buy a duplex, live in one half, rent out the other, letting the tenant cover most of the mortgage while you continue to invest. The math of this hybrid strategy, house hacking, is a whole separate conversation that deserves its own video. The most important question here isn't who wins on average. It's 2 questions. How many years do you genuinely plan to stay in one place? And if you choose to rent, will you honestly invest the difference? Everything else is just a derivative of those 2 answers.